Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this recap lesson on chapters 9 to 12 of Dorian Gray, what I have subtitled here as the aftermath, as it covers basically the fallout, the aftermath of Sybil's death in chapter 8, which at the end of chapter 7, and then what happens afterwards. As promised, today there are no new chapters. You don't have to do any pre-reading for this lesson, but it will be definitely helpful for you if you can have Dorian Gray open in front of you, because you're going to go back through chapters 9 to 12 today and see if you can summarise them. So our learning objective for the day is to summarise what we've learned about Dorian from these 4 chapters so that we can start to explore some of Wilde's choices in more detail. I'm going to get you at the end of this lesson to write me a short analytical paragraph based on what you know so far. So the first thing I want you to do, and I'm going to do some of this with you as well, so you'll have ideas from me after this slide, is to take each of the chapters in turn, chapter 9, 10, 11 and 12, and see if you can think about what's important from this chapter in terms of Dorian's progression as a character. So what are the key moments, what stands out to you, and how can you summarise how Dorian changes from the immediate aftermath of Sybil's death in chapter 9 to the build-up to Basil's death, or the murder of Basil, at the end of chapter 12. So see if you can chart that change in his character through quotations from each chapter. Pause the video here, take about 10 minutes on this task, and then I'll give you some of my own ideas to maybe add to your own notes once you've finished. So here are a couple of ideas from each chapter from me. The first one here, stop Basil, I won't hear it, and so on. I think there's quite an interesting line in here in what's done is done. That's a line that Oscar Wilde has possibly stolen from Macbeth. It's something that Lady Macbeth says to her husband in the middle of Act 3, just before the Banquo's ghost scene. And it's kind of like this echo of a hidden guilt, like something that needs to be left unsaid, that Dorian doesn't really want to discuss what he's done to this woman. So although for the rest of the novel we never hear of Sybil again, he doesn't really bring her up. Certainly at this point in chapter 9 we get the sense that he does still feel, if not responsible for her death, then at least somewhat guilty that she has died. We also get in chapter 9, obviously when we discussed it, we talked about it in relation to chapter 8, which is kind of the mirror of it. We've got Basil's confession. So if you can remember back to the lesson we did on chapter 9, it was all about the rather effeminate, rather submissive language that Basil uses to describe how he feels about Dorian. The words like dominated, soul, brain and power by you. Your memory haunts us artists like an exquisite dream. I worship you. These are all quite good indications that Dorian at this point has the power, has control over Basil, but at the same time, according to the first quote, feels quite guilty about what he's done to Sybil. So that's some ideas that you can take from chapter 9. In chapter 10, the key theme, the key act of this chapter is the removal of the painting from Dorian's sitting room into his attic. If you remember the lesson, we discussed the psychological metaphor symbol behind taking something to an attic, how it relates to Freud's idea of the id, the ego, and the superego. Sam quite rightly pointed out for us the colour purple used for the pall that he throws over the painting at this point, the idea of his corpse, or the corpse of his soul, slowly rotting away underneath this pall up in the attic. We also get the nice little bit of symbolism. I'm afraid it's rather heavy when Dorian gets his 2 workers to carry the painting up the stairs. The painting is both heavy in physicality and its mental weight on Dorian at this point. And then I've taken a quote out for you. 4th bullet point here is about the attic itself. The idea of it used to be a playroom for Dorian. It was a room that his grandfather had made specifically for Dorian to play in and study in. But again, it's a mirror of what's happening at the moment, in that Dorian's grandfather kind of stuffed him away in the attic, kept him out of sight, because maybe he was ashamed of Dorian and the relationship that he came from. Dorian's doing the same thing here with his own soul. He's ashamed of what's happening, although he probably doesn't want to admit it at this point. The act of taking this portrait upstairs means that he wants to keep it a secret. He doesn't want to reveal his true self to anyone else. So there's a few ideas for you from chapter 10. Remember, feel free to pause this video at any point and take any notes that you need to make on your own sheets. In chapter 11, we do get the long list of objects that I've asked you to research for homework that hopefully I'm going to see some good work on next Tuesday when I see you again. We've got further look at the attic itself, Dorian creeping upstairs to look at it. He also takes a mirror with him and looks at the reflection that he sees within that mirror. Although we're not going to do it today, this whole motif of a mirror might be a quite interesting point to compare to chapter 3 of Dracula, which is another similar mirror scene with different parts of the soul on display in different parts of the mirror. So there's something there to keep in the back of your mind for later on. We also talk about the things that Dorian has around him. In the case of the second bullet point here, we've got the long cedar chests in which he keeps his religious robes. They're called the raiment of the Bride of Christ, which is basically all of the fancy clothes that a priest would wear, someone from the Roman Catholic Church. We looked at the symbolism of cedar and how that is often used in the building of churches, the building of temples. So I think we discussed when we did chapter 11 together, we discussed how this was Dorian trying to control the environment around him. He's trying to control culture, control the objects that he has in his house, to the point where he's even now trying to put God into a box and keep him in a small temple within his own house. So there are lots of different layers of control within this chapter. And then finally, in chapter 12, we move from the abstract objects of chapter 11, the historical figures, the jewels and the perfumes and things like that. We move from those objects into more real, concrete names of the people that he has influenced over the last few years, the people that he has ruined. So the consequences of Dorian's actions start to take form in this chapter. He is influential over people like Sir Henry Ashton and Adrian Singleton and the young Duke of Perth in this chapter. So we get to see a sense that although in chapter 11 Dorian seems to be hiding himself away and dealing only with himself, when Basil reappears in chapter 12, we get the sense that the opposite is true, that actually in amongst all the collection of art and things like that, he's also been corrupting other young men around London. The other final quote I've given you here is "Don't touch me." This is a direct echo of the same line that Dorian says in chapter 7 when he's in front of Sybil. So it's interesting that at the two stages of Dorian's life where he ends up involved in the death of another character and pushing that character away, he says the same thing, that "don't touch me" line. So there's definitely some symbolism you could dig into there in terms of what exactly it is that he's pushing away from him when he pushes both Sybil and Basil away before their deaths. So you've got some quotes there to be getting on with. Remember, pause this video at any point, add these quotes or add notes on them to your own notes before you move on to the writing task. So this is the writing task that I'm going to give you today, and it's not going to be a full essay. I don't want one of those from you at all. I do, however, want at least one from all of you, two if you want to, analytical paragraph. A paragraph that would, if you're going to use Miss Child's burger paragraph or burger essay structure, it's going to be the cheese, the lettuce, the actual meat of the burger. So your question is this: how does Wilde use language to present the changes in Dorian's character in chapters 9 to 12? And at this point, I want you to dig out any sort of notes you've made on how to structure an analytical paragraph at A-level correctly, and I want to see what you can do with that question today. I also want you to keep in mind today the assessment objectives that are relevant to a task like this. So in our work on Dorian Gray and Dracula, we're working on paper 2 of the Edexcel A-level spec. That particular paper tests you on AO1, AO2, AO3 and AO4 from this list. So AO1 to 3 are exactly as they say on the tin. They are exactly the same as they are at GCSE level, where we go for essentially quotes and ideas for AO1, analysis of language, analysis of symbolism and the writer's methods for AO2, and then context for AO3. AO4 is your ability to connect the two texts together, so Dracula and Dorian Gray, and how they connect together, how they complement each other. A of 5 is not tested for that unit. Today, obviously, I'm not going to get you to write about Dracula. Your question only deals with Oscar Wilde and Dorian's character. So we're not going to think about A of 4 skills today. You only need to keep in mind when you're writing today your ability to comment on AO1 skills, AO2 skills, and AO3. So I should see throughout your answer today embedded quotations, a creative response to the text using those examples, using concrete examples and quotations from the text, using terminology, the words that we usually associate with English literature study. I need to see AO2, which is your analysis of language, your analysis of symbolism, and really that first part of the question, how does Wilde use language? So always bringing it back to the author as well. And then finally, AO3, context. You can make lots of different links to context here. You could talk about Orientalism, you can talk about queer theory, you could talk about treatment of homosexuality in the Victorian period. There are lots of different things that we've covered that you might want to go back to your notes on these chapters and have a look at. You can see that the percentage worth for each of these assessment objectives is on the right hand side there. That's based on the whole group of exams, so paper 1, 2 and 3. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to those percentages when you are writing your paragraphs, drafting your paragraphs, but simply try and write so that you hit each of those assessment objectives in turn. So, get on with it now please. You've got your question and you've got your notes, and I want to see what you can put together in around about 20 minutes. So I want you to spend about 20 minutes writing at least, like I said, at least one analysis paragraph, possibly 2 if you get there, but really I just want to see the quality of your writing coming through now. While you're writing today, I want you to keep in mind where your thoughts and tracking is going within your own mind as you're writing. So are you keeping the focus of the question in your mind at all times? Are you keeping the assessment objectives in mind? Have you made a little note of them down the side? When you feel yourself coming off topic or you feel your sentences running on for too long, what do you do to bring yourself round? So I really want you to focus on the process today. How does this paragraph come together? I don't want you to just write mindlessly until you've got a couple of hundred words and call it a day. I really want you to focus on the process of writing these paragraphs today. It's something that we're going to come back to in later lessons. You'll see that there's an assignment set up, which is simply a blank page with a question at the top of it. If you want to write in assignments for me, that's fine. However, if you want to write away from assignments, you want to handwrite your answer, that's also fine. Just please give them to me. When I see you, I'm going to actually see you on Tuesday. Thank you, Year 12. Have a good day.